Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Hospitality Resilience series. This is part 2 on how to build your personal resilience and inner immunity. Today's session is about food and the mind, the surprising link between diet, stress, and anxiety. We'll be learning how to hone your gut instinct through nutrition. Leaders have benefited from trusting their gut instinct during this crisis, and this session promises to be a lively and engaging discussion that will benefit all of us over this challenging period. I'd now like to introduce our hosts. We have Chris Mumford from Service Leadership and HoCoSo, and we have John Hazan from Atlas Events. And we have myself, Jonathan Humphreys from HoCoSo. I'd also like to welcome all participants, including HoCoSo Connect members. And I'm now going to pass over to Chris Mumford, who's going to talk about the opportunity in terms of holistic leadership.
Thanks, Jonathan. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here on the number 2 of our Hospitality Resilience series. Holistic leadership is essentially, in very simple terms, it's less about what you do as a leader, it's more about who you are. So it's that interface of bringing your character and your value set into how you lead your people and your organizations. And if we look at how leadership is evolving, we've kind of come from talking a lot about IQ and then EQ, emotional intelligence. And today we're seeing more and more physical intelligence and spiritual intelligence play a role in what leadership is defined as today. And certainly around the physical, today's topic on nutrition is highly important. I always think of the aeroplane analogy where, the oxygen mask drops and you have to take care of yourself before you can help others. The same way that leaders need to be kind of in tune with themselves and supporting themselves so that they can then support and nourish the organization and people around them. So talking of nourishment, nutrition, I think, is a fantastic subject, one which obviously impacts us all and certainly helps play a role in leaders becoming stronger and more resilient during these times. So John, over to you, I think, with an intro into Rhaya and our session today.
Indeed. Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. I am extremely delighted to introduce Rhaya Jordan, our guest today. We are very lucky to have Rhaya with us today. I have the difficult task, the challenge to précis Rhaya's many years of experience in just a minute. But I will try my best, Rhaya. So Rhaya studied naturopathy in her hometown of Sydney in the 80s and has continued to work in the field of natural health and more specifically nutrition ever since. She was part of the team that wrote the first BSc in nutrition therapy at the University of Westminster, where she taught at both under and postgrad levels for nearly a decade before then moving on to teach at the Centre for Nutrition and Lifestyle Management. More recently, Rhaya has been serving her special interest in sustainable food movements in her work as a nutrition consultant to Daylesford Organics. Alongside this, she also runs a very successful private practice where she consults with private individuals and organizations, advising them in the field of natural health and nutrition. I can attest to Rhaya's brilliance through personal experience. Rhaya has worked with a number of my friends and more recently my wife. So the Hazan household fully subscribes to the macrobiotic diet. I can't say it, but we subscribe to it. And I have to say, where we with the kind of crazy Friday nights with a bottle of Bordeaux are perhaps less prevalent as they used to be. Maybe we'll settle for that. I can't do away with alcohol altogether. Rhaya, thank you so much for joining us today. We are delighted to be with you today to discuss this. What I know is going to be a fascinating, engaging, and far-reaching discussion. So I'm looking forward to it. And I wonder if perhaps as a starting point, you could enlighten us on the subject of mind and body. We read a lot about the correlation, and I'm aware that some of the recent learning has maybe challenged our existing knowledge or preconceived ideas around this. So could you explain a little bit more about the relationship between mind and body and from that gut instinct?
Okay, thank you very much for having me here. This is definitely a pet topic of mine because I believe that this is something that we get horribly wrong, especially in a time like this year in its dying embers, which has been remarkably stressful, we very, very naturally assume that our experience of stress or of depression or a lack of motivation is entirely psychological, with good evidence about us. But the reality is a complex interplay between the state of your body and what's happening in your environment. And you can make it's low-hanging fruit. It's such an some easy changes can help you feel less jangled. And I think the analogy that I would give you for the kind of white noise and anxiety that comes from your sort of dietary choices and lack of sleep is the idea of white noise. You know, you can't get the signal from the noise, because if your blood sugar's not right, you can't think as clearly, you're more prone to being irritable or potentially more prone to feeling overwhelmed. And when your blood sugar is very, very stable, or at least it's easy for your body to keep it on an even keel, and you've got sufficient B vitamins and sufficient magnesium in your system and all of these other subtleties that are pretty easy to sort out with a reasonable diet that includes Budo, then it makes it much easier to focus on what's real anxiety and it's not faux anxiety, because it's true as well, but anxiety that's actually just coming from your system being out of whack, undernourished or over sugared and caffeinated, and the sort of cycle that you can get on from there. And I think people are missing it completely, because especially in hospitality, there's good reason to be anxious. So we don't even think, actually, if I look after myself better, my levels of background anxiety could drop right down and my clarity could be so much better. My sense of resilience could improve.
I'm interested, Rhaya, just if I may, on that issue of the clarity. So if we talk about gut instinct and thinking about decision making for leaders, and when I mentioned physical intelligence, part of that is being in tune with your body and listening to what your body has to say, which is actually, again, we've always had this separation of what's in the head and what's in the body, but actually it's all one. And if you your body does react to things. And I guess from what you're saying is, if you've got your stomach or your gut under control, as it were, it's kind of a calm zone, then when things do arise, you're going to notice them more. Say I'm in a meeting, there's a topic being discussed, I'm feeling anxious about it, I can feel it in my stomach. That's because of this topic or this decision I'm having to make, versus, I ate the wrong thing, had my Bordeaux for breakfast.
Yeah.
Is that right? I mean, is that
yeah,
kind of creating the level playing field?
Mm-hmm. It just makes it all a little bit clearer. We've been completely ripped away. I mean, it's a long time since we humans really have lived in the wild, and I'm not advocating it, even if you felt like maybe running away to the bush at some stage this year. But certainly, to give one example of somebody that I worked with, whose blood sugar, they were doing a lot of comfort eating, they were under enormous pressure. And so when the biscuits would come out in a meeting, they'd be preoccupied by the biscuits. That's like a classic example of finding it difficult to focus, not because of a lack of talent or a lack of grasp of the situation that he was presented with, but just because his system was out of whack and he was craving comfort foods and feeling very distracted by them. And another classic example would be, I was working with a financial group at one stage who did a lot of work with Americans. They had their own kitchen, fabulous lunchtime food, but after the kitchen closed down after lunch, there was only sweet biscuits really, or beautiful pastries available, but just sugary things to eat. And yet some of these people would be working through till 7 or 8 at night regularly. And the Americans would come on board, in our early evening in the UK, and they're perky. They've got their morning coffee. They've only just woken up. And the poor Brits were sidling down and trying to live on sugar. And guess who had the advantages in those negotiations? So nothing, once again, it's trying to get rid of that sort of white noise that a system that is tired and is eating food that isn't really sustaining is going to bring into your business, and how more jangled you can feel when you're not calm and settled in your own body.
Can I investigate, Rhaya, the maybe the science behind that? Because I don't profess to be hugely knowledgeable in this area, but I've come across reading about the vagal nerve, which links mind, heart, and stomach, and also our production of serotonin and the importance of dopamine, and all of this, which is supporting what you're saying there. I think about, you know, what we do with our gut, what we ingest, has a direct kind of chemical reaction up into the brain and heart. Could you enlighten a little bit on that?
Yeah, so these are the mechanisms that are coming to light. Nutrition science is changing under our feet as we speak at the moment. It's a really exciting time. And we now know that over 90% of the serotonin in our body is produced in our gut. And the way I would describe serotonin to people who aren't nerds about neurotransmitters is it's the open fire, the glass of whiskey, the sleeping dog, that level of contentment is serotonin. And in the gut, serotonin helps to reduce cramps. And we do know that when a lot of serotonin is made in the gut, it reflexes up into the brain. The chemicals themselves don't travel to the brain, but there's a neural message that goes via this nerve to the heart and to the brain that basically sends a message to the brain that all is well in the gut. When we are out of sync, we've eaten something that doesn't agree with us, or what is very, very common, we've eaten incredibly quickly, under pressure, with a lot of adrenaline in our system, either trying to field emails at the same time or whatever else we're doing, we don't digest food as well. We don't necessarily choose the food that we're eating as well. And there can be some disruption and difficulty in digesting this poorly absorbed food. And that sends these mild, vague alarm system messages to the brain, leaving you with kind of, you know, sort of free floating anxiety for some people, or maybe a lower mood. And then you add into that disruption in blood sugar. Now, if you're not diabetic and we drew your sugar, it would be absolutely rock solid, but it's the amount of work that happens behind the scene for your body to keep your blood sugar stable, that is where you get this sense of wear and tear and being jangled. You know, until you actually develop diabetes, your mechanisms don't break, but they're working very, very hard. The effort biochemically your body's putting in can leave you feeling more drained, more distracted, just not right. I mean, we kind of know how we feel when we eat well, but the mechanisms are just clearer now. And on top of this is some interesting work that happened with some people who had profound food poisoning in America, and the links to clinical depression were disproportionately high in this town that had had their water supply poisoned with C. diff, just a nasty bug. And so through that, there was more investigation showing that there's a strong link with things that we previously thought were only triggered by life stresses, and now we're realizing can be triggered by the balance of the gut microbiome as well. So clinical depression, we would rarely look to the body for the cause of that. We'd look to the mind. What was your childhood like? What was your family of origin like? I mean, these are the standard things that we would interrogate first. And we now know that that's not necessary. That's an incomplete picture.
I think what's fascinating at these current times is obviously people's schedules have been kind of completely restructured, and they're trying to balance many things, especially now with this online medium that we're now engaging in ourselves, and trying to keep track of what we're eating, how we're feeling, and what works and what doesn't work. Maybe we've got actually a kind of incubated space where we can do this, because we've got a safe space. We can actually choose what we want to eat, most likely, because we're not having to go out to restaurants so many times at the moment. There's probably not big lunches going on, depending on where you are in the world. So how do you suggest that people can actually keep track and find out what works and what resonates for them so that they can create something for themselves?
It's such a good question, because we do have this sort of, in many parts of this world, this sort of little lacuna, this hiatus that we might be able to use to change things up. Because to add another layer into this, food affects us differently depending on when we eat it. So eating food late at night, we have now discovered through the work of people like Sachin Patel, is quite a stress on the body. And when people begin to, when somebody like me turns up, people tend to immediately think I'm the food police. And John just absolutely slandering me at the beginning, saying I've put everybody on a macrobiotic diet and taken them off wine. It's all lies, of course. But they tend to think that the way forward is to give up the bad food and eat more of the good food. And in fact, that's not a useful way to go forward. And we're very, very biochemically individual. And so use this place to get curious about the way that you eat and the way that it affects you. And one of the easiest ways to do that is just to keep a very open journal, a sort of food and mood journal, or a food and energy, whatever is something that you're thinking about at the moment. And just jot down what you've eaten and jot down how you feel during the day. Keep it very open-ended and with a spirit of curiosity rather than I'm eating too much rubbish. There's a very common pattern. I worked for a long time in the City of London, and there's a very, very common pattern with professionals under a lot of stress, where they might have very, very long days, but that late afternoon is a classic time when a lot of people are actually very hungry and when the quality of food around is at its worst. So that's when we would swap a good meal, which we might actually feel like having, for snack food. And snack food is inevitably higher in salt and sugar and poor quality fats. So one of the classic things that I've done for years is encourage people to have a meal sort of late afternoon when they're really hungry, you know, around about 5 o'clock maybe, or 6 o'clock. Profoundly unfashionable, but doable if you're in lockdown like we are in London. And then eat, if you want to eat later in the day, eat something much lighter. So we know that the liver has a body clock. We know that the gut has a body clock, and even the microbiome sleep at night. So the 3 meals a day that we have inherited in the West is really a hangover from the Industrial Revolution. And it suits Victorian factories, but it doesn't suit the modern worker at all. And in the hospitality trade, we know how the hours, especially if you're in an international company, the hours can be really different. So try and eat with your body. Try and eat when your body is hungry, even if that means that your meals are at an unorthodox time. And keep a note. If you have a very unfashionably early supper and you wake the next morning feeling clearer and lighter and you've slept a bit better, then you've stumbled upon a useful piece of information about your own body. So much better to be curious about yourself and what suits you and what doesn't suit you than to try and pick up the latest diet or the latest fad and run with that, even if it doesn't suit how you eat.
I love that as a message, Rhaya. That's a really powerful message from a coaching perspective. Obviously, we look very much to the individual rather than to a generalization. But I haven't heard that before in the diet space. It's wonderful. Like you said, don't go to these general, whatever the best-selling book is by the latest chef or the latest nutritionist. It's really an interesting message to say you need to get a wider understanding of yourself and become self-aware first. It's a running theme to this series. Understand self, build knowledge around self, and work out what works for you. That's a really powerful message when linked to diet.
Yeah, and it's a very useful one when it comes to comfort eating as well, which is an area that is coming up a lot for people because the whole COVID thing internationally has been a double whammy around food in terms of structure has disappeared. So a lot of our meal times might have been dictated by the workplace. And the second thing that's happened is the kitchen's just a hop, step and a jump away if you're working from home. I appreciate not everybody still is. And so you've got the option to give your brain a rest. You've got an option to refresh yourself by just going and snacking all day when you're not necessarily hungry. And over time, that can leave you feeling more tired and more jangled. And instead of sitting there thinking, I want to go and eat a biscuit now, maybe take yourself outside, breathe some fresh air, or have a shower. If you're working from home, that's a great one because it's incredibly physically stimulating. It really breaks your state. It really refreshes you. And then this is the trick. If you still want to eat something, go and eat something, because actually descending into a war with yourself about sugar or about comfort eating tends to elongate the process and set you up to actually binge, rather than just going and grabbing, say, a mince pie and then eating it slowly and enjoying it. That's the other trick when it comes to comfort eating. People tend to think that the answer is restriction, and we know restriction leads to binging. So it's not about being strict with yourself. It's about being curious. It's about giving yourself more permission and being a bit more present and enjoying the food that you do eat. Wolfing down a mince pie while telling yourself you're not supposed to have it, it's too sweet, this is a ridiculous thing for you to be doing, that you're too, whatever venom you're giving yourself in your brain is going to deplete you even more of dopamine, which is driving the comfort eating, and make you want another mince pie because you now need more comfort because you've done it to yourself. Whereas go, fantastic, best mince pies I can get my hands on, really enjoy them, pay attention to them when you're eating them, and then go back to your desk. You're much more likely to stop at 1 or 2 then.
I'm really guilty of the eating too fast. And since we first met, Rhaya, I'm trying to slow down and be more conscious about it because, I wolf it down because it just tastes so good. I just want to have it all as quickly as possible. But maybe you could speak to also, I know you have this idea of kind of eating things with your non-dominant hand, for example. Is that part of this appreciating and being more conscious and slowing it down?
There, sometimes when you want to do something like take advantage of how strange things are at the moment to change your behavior, it's actually the behavioral scientists who are sometimes arguably of more use to us than my tribe. It's a disloyal thing to say, but the work about eating with your non-dominant hand and the work about taking a deep breath, putting your knife and fork down or your chopsticks or whatever, and taking a deep breath before you finish your meal is really is a really useful thing to do. And normally when somebody sees a nutritionist like me, they expect me just to manipulate what's on their plate. But in fact, that's the end process. That's the final thing that you might do, or you might do it if you've got a very particular medical outcome. But in terms of just wanting to improve your nourishment, it really makes a difference if you just work with small behavior change, be more present, slow things down. So what we know is that slowing people down in the past leads to a drop in food intake of up to 20%. So if the average person is eating, the average person doesn't exist, but indulge me for a moment. The average person eats about 2,000 calories a day, then that's 200 calories. Is that 10 or 20? But over time, it really amounts to easy weight loss if that's somebody's goal, or clearing up their hunger signals, because it's very likely that we haven't been truly hungry in some cases for decades, not because we've been eating unusually, but just because we've been eating when we can and eating for comfort. And clearing out that signal from the noise really makes a big difference to feeling more settled and more comfortable in your body, and also can take you out of the firing line of some of the major sort of lifestyle illnesses.
Yeah, I think what I'm also picking up on here, just as a complete side note, is a massive opportunity for the restaurant industry here and food and beverage industry to start thinking about how they could cater towards people who want to move away from the 3 meal a day standard offering. Just kind of, obviously the audience is from a hospitality background, they travel, they're in the industry, they love food, most likely in some shape or form or another. There's a lot of talk, and you've mentioned it before in some of your work, around building your personal scaffold, which I really like. And because we know behavior change is so difficult, I like the idea of this kind of mental symbol, that this is kind of a way to move towards doing that. And also there's the example of Mark Bittman on the VB6 diet. I was wondering if you could maybe explore that a little bit.
I've always loved that story. So for those of you that are not familiar with Mark Bittman, he was the restaurant critic for the New York Times. So arguably one of the most important restaurant critics in America at the time. And he began to get ill, his cholesterol went up, classic sort of the ills that you would expect would befall a middle-aged restaurant critic. And his doctor recommended that he go vegan, which was just completely impossible for him to continue his career. And so he decided that he would go vegan before 6 in the evening. So he ate differently during his work day, and then come 6 o'clock, gloves were off and he'd go and eat whatever he wanted to. And it made a dramatic impact on his health. And I particularly love Mark Bittman's example, not because I think everybody should be vegan before 6, though that's one solution. It's that he started thinking, well, what's going to work for me? What are the meals that are important to me where I just eat whatever I want to? There's all sorts of cultural cues for big business meetings, particularly when I've worked with women. It's really important that if they're negotiating something quite big, that I'm afraid, gentlemen, women can't order salads. They're taken less seriously at the negotiating table. It sounds crazy, but food is gendered, and it's rude in many parts of the world to refuse food. These are not the times where you would start being pernickety about what you're eating, or when you're out with family or you're having a big festive meal. Where I would recommend that you get curious is just your workaday breakfast, the kind of lunch you have during your working day. The kind of the ordinary meals, because they will make up probably about 80% of what most of us eat. And when they're really good quality, what's happening in the last 20% doesn't have the huge impact on our health that some of the other strategies we use can have. So that a really pointless strategy, or one that's really inefficient, is dividing your food into these discrete 24-hour promises to yourself that in the morning, right, I'm going to eat well all day. I'm going to eat kale all day today. And then by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're starving, and you start on the chocolate and biscuits, and then you have the glass of wine, and then you wake up the next morning with this same, what I would argue is essentially a negative message to yourself. And just go, what would be really delicious for breakfast that you would really enjoy and that would leave you feeling satisfied and also feel good in your body? That's and for me, it's usually a protein-based breakfast that sorts me out. So I'm a big one for scrambled eggs. My family's part Asian. Mine's always, I'm afraid, going to have fish sauce and chili in it. And I know that that's not for everybody, but that's how we roll in my household. And that's what I enjoy. And I enjoy a later breakfast. Oats are a fantastic food. And there's a lot of evidence that they're very good for blood fats. If I have porridge for breakfast, that's me done. I am hungry all day and slightly irritable. So that sets me off on a whole day of eating. It just doesn't suit me. And that's the fundamental point. It doesn't matter if the food is beautiful quality if it doesn't suit you, or if you're forcing yourself to eat it very early in the morning, when in fact your body really doesn't want food till later in the day. Be a ferocious individualist when it comes to your food.
Yeah, there it is, that individual message. Rhaya, we're getting some we're getting some questions coming in. I think it was probably all that mention of mince pies. It's triggered the very kind of topical debate around sugar. And if I pick perhaps the first question that came in from Nina around this point, the point about sugar is very interesting. I'm a definite sugar addict and find the only thing that works is going cold turkey. You've already made some comments on keeping a journal and distracting us, etc. Do you have any other advice on people dealing with food addiction?
Okay, so that's food addiction doesn't really operate completely like other addictions, because you can't withdraw from food completely, unless you have a major psychiatric illness. And so it can be very tricky in the language of food addiction. We talk a lot about trigger foods, and this is a really interesting concept to have under your belt. For some people, there are some foods that once you start eating them, you can't stop. And a lot of food is deliberately engineered to be like that, because there are two drivers to eating. You're either physically hungry, and that tends to be a much slower burn. You tend to be happy with a reasonable group of different things to eat, or it can be dopamine driven, which is more of this sugar addiction. And internally, we experience that as a much more urgent hunger. It tends to come with a lot of irritability, and it also comes loaded up with, I want pizza. I don't want anything else. I want pizza, or I want mince pies or something. You're not eating any of this, of course, John, because you're macrobiotic now. But what you can do with that is to work out that something has made you irritable, something has triggered you and triggered a stress. So look for an emotional trigger, that's one thing. And then slow down your response to giving yourself sugar. So that can be something as simple as have a glass of water, the kind of things that I was talking to Chris about earlier, like eating with your non-dominant hand, but being present if you do choose to have a trigger food. For some of us, around about the end of the year with New Year festivities and other things, we're going to be around a lot of very triggering food. And so the damage is really done if you wolf it down quickly while being venomous to yourself. So if you know that once you start that food, you won't be able to stop it, either don't eat it at all, as was suggested by our question. Was it Nina, I think you said?
Yeah, from Nina.
But if you are going to do that, Nina, you've got to leave the room. Don't do it to yourself. Don't have it in your house. I've had so many people who say, oh, I really struggle to not eat chocolate. And they've got a chocolate drawer. One guy I was speaking to, he had a chocolate drawer. And he said, well, I've got to think about my kids. And well, no, if you've got diabetes and there's if I had a chocolate drawer, I would eat chocolate every day. I'm really struck by a British Olympian I worked with once, and he wouldn't contemplate bringing chocolate into the house because he'd eat it. He didn't think that there was anything strange about that at all. He thought that was completely human. He didn't want to eat it, so he didn't bring it into his house. And this sort of feeds into what I was saying earlier. Don't have your home a sanctuary if you think you're a food addict. Don't have your trigger foods there. Don't have sweet food for other members of the family. Don't have it for your kids, because we think that some of this is genetic. So if you are a sugar junkie and you bring your children up to associate being at home means eating lots of sugar, and the warmth of your love is associated with sugar, you are encouraging that into the next generation. Make your home a sanctuary, and then when you are out and about and there is perhaps more structure to a meal that you're eating at friends, or if we ever eat meals with friends again, that is, then you've got that scaffolding that helps you eat a bit less of that.
Makes perfect sense. Remove that temptation. Makes sense.
Make life easy. Make this easy for yourself. People associate changing their diet with suffering, nearly because they always associate it with changing what they're eating and taking away food they enjoy. Whereas probably the biggest changes you'll get into your health is eating at times that suit you, eating when you're hungry, and slowing down how quickly you eat. All of those have big impacts on how well food sits in you. And we now know that that then has a big impact into your feelings of mental resilience.
Can we talk about two areas, which, I mean, one is at the moment in terms of boosting my day, to start with caffeine. You know, I don't fully get going, probably onto my second one. So, you know, I'm curious about, you know, in terms of the link between stress, anxiety. I always feel that it calms me down. I feel like it's kind of setting my clarity. Not the third one. Then I notice obviously it has an impact, and I don't go after that. And also this time of year, everybody being at home, lots of festivities, alcohol. So, you know, in terms of kind of having that stability, and also building our resilience, could you give us some feedback on those two areas and the effect on, I guess, dopamine and serotonin as well?
So caffeine in moderate doses, we think, has a really beneficial effect on the body. Now, I am so thrilled because I grew up in Sydney, which was populated by Italians after the Second World War, and I grew up with really, really good coffee. And so I love coffee. And like you, 2 cups in the morning, every morning, like clockwork. I love a morning coffee, but I don't drink it in the afternoon. And I don't drink it instead of eating, which is probably a way of using coffee that's going to leave you feeling really jangled and make you try to push through tiredness to the point that then you don't sleep because, you know, the coffee ramps you up. And it's the same with alcohol. Alcohol has this paradoxical effect on our brain where it's initially a sedative, well, initially it's a stimulant and then moves into being a sedative, I should say. And very often we use it to mark the end of the day, and sometimes we can mark the end of the day without alcohol. That can be really useful. Alcohol nearly always will wake us up at about 3 in the morning. So if that's part of your sleep pattern, is disturbed sleep, think about reducing the level of alcohol that you're drinking. And really the only alcohol that seems to have a positive effect on the gut is red wine. So the rest of it is treats. But by all means have treats, but just be a little bit mindful that over the long term, it's going to increase your need for B vitamins. It's going to use up more magnesium, and it's probably going to disturb your sleep. So be a bit mindful about drinking more water. This is a case where I would really say get a top-notch B vitamin, get a really good multi, something like that. And especially if you're going to be drinking more and seeing sort of members of the family over Christmas, have some extra B vitamins in your system. But absolutely, but give your body a break from it sometimes too. And if you feel like you couldn't wind down at the end of the day without a glass of wine, just slow your drinking down and definitely do a little bit of interrogating. Are you living on caffeine? Are you eating your meals standing up in 30 seconds? Are you doing all of these classic things that are not giving you enough of a daytime, nighttime rhythm?
Rhaya, I wonder if I can jump in with some more questions. Another a theme that is appearing around fasting, and I know that this was in vogue quite recently, the concept of fasting. One of the questions coming in from another Rhaya, believe it or not, around intermittent fasting. Do you believe in its benefits? And then linked to this, it's submitted anonymously. That's obviously they care deeply about fasting. Want to know about, are there any health benefits in fasting, especially for longer periods of time, such as a 48-hour or 72-hour water fast? I wonder if you had any thoughts around that.
So that yes, it has become a really hot topic, and it's become a really hot topic because what a researcher called Sachin Patel discovered was actually really quite astounding. So he had rats that were genetically engineered to get very overweight and develop diabetes really easily. And he gave both little sets of ratties access to the same amount of calories in a 24-hour period, but one set only during an 8-hour window and the others whenever they wanted it. And the rats that were eating and grazing on and off the whole time, even though they ate only the same amount of food, got very ill, just went the path that genetically they were programmed to. And the little ratties who should have got diabetes and only had that 8-hour window of eating didn't develop heart disease, diabetes, or obesity. Now, this flies in the face of what we expect, where you put on more weight because you've eaten more, but it does chime in with a lot of the new science around what's happening in the gut microbiome and about eating late at night. I'm really aware I'm speaking to a hospitality crowd now, where this is, you know, part of the corporate culture, but it makes a huge difference when we eat. And so part of my agenda in recommending find out when you're hungry and eat then is very often people will delay breakfast if they can. And by doing that, you can open up easily a 12 or 14-hour window in 24 hours where you haven't eaten. And that in itself, this is pretty new science, so things will change within the next 12 months. But in about that 14-hour break, we kick in a group of our genes called the sirtuin genes, which are responsible for a lot of repair in the body. And they do not kick off unless we are fasting. So we have this deep evolutionary repair mechanism that only kicked in when things were really grim and there wasn't enough food around, and it would make sure that we could stay in really good shape if we went without food for shorter periods of time. Of course, push it too far and things go horribly wrong for us, but in the short term, it's really useful. It's and what we've find is if we can get people to elongate that time between dinner and breakfast, that works really well. And Patel is continuing his research. So it's not so much a matter of believing in it, it's like the science is already pretty strong in animal models, and now we're getting a better sense of it in human models as well. And in terms of longer fasts, yes, we think that there is benefit. But I've got a caveat whenever I'm speaking to a general audience like this, where I don't know everybody's background. If somebody has a very disrupted or conflicted relationship with food, they can love fasting because it makes it all go away, at least for 24 hours or 48 hours. But it also can set you up to be more likely to binge at the end of it. So going back to that ferocious independence, so to speak, for some people, it can be great. There are good physiological underpinnings. These repair genes are great. It can be a great rest. Sometimes in the middle of all the Christmas chaos, people will have a day just drinking warm bone broths all day, or just drinking water to rest their system. It's great for us. But for some of us, it's going to make us feel deprived, miserable, and desperate for more biscuits once we get off the binge. And we can predict that for them, it will trigger weight gain, not weight loss, trigger worse metabolic health, not better let me try that again. Not better metabolic health. And that's to do with our relationship with food rather than the physiology of it. So yeah, I think fasting is great. It's going to do some people's heads in. If you're one of those people, don't do it to yourself just yet.
I also just wanted to maybe just encapsulate what you were saying, because I think we've covered a lot. So I just thought I'd do a bit of a recap here. We've talked about the link between mind and body, the vagal nerve, the link between production of serotonin in the gut, which is critical in terms of our sense of well-being, the importance of keeping a diary of sorts to figure out what works for us and what doesn't work for us. In terms of altering or adjusting, let's call it, or refining our behavior, because we're not necessarily needing a massive behavioral shift. But if we look at building a personal scaffold across the course of a week and trying to eat as healthy as possible that works for us, and we need to be in tune with ourselves, then it allows us the flexibility to have those moments that we can enjoy with friends or family, or when we're going out socializing, hopefully in the very near future. And that in itself, in terms of looking for a replacement for the dopamine, looking at a change of physiology, which could work as a replacement for that rather than the attraction towards sugar. I think also you've touched on a lot to do with how people are feeling at this particular point in time, that they may be feeling stress and anxiety. Obviously, for many reasons, we need to figure it out, but it could be because of how they're eating. I was just wondering, there's also generally sugar tends to increase anxiety, and would you say protein and fats tend to reduce anxiety? Is that kind of in simple forms? And do you want to just, if people are feeling anxious during these times, and they're potentially going to go into a big meeting, or they're doing a presentation, or maybe things are happening, but maybe it is because they could actually do something to reduce their anxiety in a particular situation. I was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
In general, protein and good quality fats, things like good nuts, good nut butters, avocados, olive oil in particular, these foods are all foods we tend to find, in different chicken skin or through China. We tend to find deeply comforting, and when they're eaten in good forms, people can find that very soothing. And protein also tends to leave us feeling more satisfied longer. And one of the best ways ever to improve your gut microbiome is with fiber. So when you eat all of these kind of foods, basically they're all found in fruit and vegetables. So you eat some more vegetables during the day, you're going to, in general, feel better. And if you've had some of those and then you have an almond croissant, it's probably not going to do to your system what a day on coffee and then a croissant is going to do to your system. So you can balance it all out really evenly. And it can be worthwhile. I think that if you're going into something quite big, I would always recommend that you have a really good meal beforehand so that your blood sugar is really rock solid. You're not at all hungry. If wine comes out or coffee comes out, you've already got your system sort of set up and in balance so that you're not so jangled. If the whole thing runs over, you're not going to be horribly hungry. It's a very, very good strategy. And a lot of the international people who that I've worked with, they will often fast on planes, and claim that it really helps improve jet lag. So that's another tip as well, if you're working in a lot of time zones. For a lot of us, plain food isn't too miserable to pass up. And
I was going to say, that's the meal you want to skip if you're on a business trip.
That's right. Absolutely. And that can make you feel a lot better. And then if you find you haven't eaten for 18 hours, by all means have something with good quality fats and good quality protein. Don't go for something really sugary and refined, because it will hit you very, very hard.
Talking of strategies and sugars, etc., we're coming to a perhaps the most challenging time of the year from a nutritionist point of view. I don't know. With the Christmas diet impending, is there a seasonal survival guide? And we've touched on it a little bit already around mince pies and fortifying breakfasts. But is there anything you can tell us that will help us get through this season as best we can?
Yeah. So every year that this comes up. So my first piece of advice is to relax and enjoy whatever you end up eating. One of the worst things you can do is hover over a food and attack yourself viciously while you eat it so that you can't enjoy it. That's counterproductive. and is going to make you feel dreadful, and it's not good for your body either. So relax and enjoy what food is around. Eat slowly. That's going to help you enjoy it. If you're going somewhere where you think that the food's just going to be really refined, really sugary, leave you feeling dreadful, eat before you go. And if you're around trigger foods that you don't want to eat, that do make you feel hungover or lousy, move yourself away from them. COVID's given us a great opportunity to meet people away from food, if that's what we want to do. Because in London at the moment, for example, we can meet people outside. So the kind of alternatives we've talked about for going and getting a snack when you're not hungry, like going for a walk, having a shower, doing 2 minutes of HIIT exercise or something, we can put that into our social life and meet somebody and go for a walk with them, or meet somebody. COVID gives us a fantastic opportunity to take some of our socializing away from food, if that's what we would like to do. And the other thing is just be ferocious about where you meet somebody. Go somewhere where the food is really delicious and worth eating. Because, you know, we want to keep hospitality.
My mother will be delighted to hear that. And hopefully my brother, if he's listening, because he'll be cooking this Christmas. Brilliant.
Oh, good. Good food, I hope.
Absolutely.
So I think, Rhaya, we've pretty much covered all the topics. I think we've covered the questions that have come in, unless there are any last questions from any of the audience.
No, I've picked out the main running theme. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to say a big thank you to Rhaya Jordan for joining us on this Hospitality Resilience series. I'd like to say a big thank you to co-hosts Chris Mumford and John Hazan. And I want to just say a big thank you in terms of our journey this year with HoCoSo. It started with building our year of community, and we're fully engaged on the Hospitality Resilience series. And we really encourage you to explore this with us further. We've just released a podcast looking at the aspect of mental health and holistic awareness and holistic leadership with Mariana Palmiro. And we'll be releasing another podcast next week with Monica Konakova on the building of communities to end the year as we started with the importance of communities. So on behalf of everybody here today, I'd like to say a big thank you to all of our guests and listeners. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me.